Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Delora Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Welcome to the Hinckley Report, where we bring together journalists, elected officials, and thought leaders from across the state to discuss the most pressing political issues affecting Utahns. Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Julia Ritchie, reporter with KUER, Glenn Beebe, political reporter with ABC4 Utah, and Rod Arquette, host of the Rod Arquette Show. So glad to have you all with us today.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Let's jump into Utah politics for a minute. The 4th Congressional District is interesting. We had Mayor McAdams on our show a couple weeks ago, didn't hint at this, but this week he announced he's going to run for that seat against Mia Love. Julia, let's start with you a minute. Why now, and what's the strategy?
Yeah, so Wednesday night we were watching the 3rd Congressional District debate, and then a little innocuous tweet came up from Mayor McAdams that says, "I'm in." And just like that, he upended the entire Utah politics Twitter hashtag, right? I spoke to him yesterday, and he says he is unhappy with Utah's federal delegation. He says they are not getting work done. And when he says that, what he really means is Mia Love is not getting things done, right? So that's going to be his pitch to voters next year. He's going to have his work cut out for him, but that's what he says he wants to do. He seems like he's all in.
What do you think, Glenn? Is that the approach? They're not getting it done, I'm going to get it done? Is that the message?
That's every politician, right? Because they have to prove that someone's not doing their job and why you should vote for them. But he has to do it this far out because he has to get his name recognition out there, especially with Congress now. Anyone who runs for seat normally has to do a lot more fundraising than they used to have to do. So that's why he has to get his name out there now. But a lot can happen in the next year. He has budgets coming up. He's probably going to try to tout his success with the county. But Mia Love's going to try to tout her success as well. But yeah, he definitely had to make the announcement now.
Interesting. Fascinating, because I asked him, I spoke with him yesterday as well, and I said, your name's been mentioned for the U.S. Senate, for the governor. Why Congress? Why the House? And he said, I just feel that that's an area where I can get things done. Like he said to Julia, he is frustrated. The Medicaid issue he's frustrated with. Other issues he's frustrated with. And he said, this is an area that I think I can make a difference. Now, he also points out that 85% of the voters in that district live in Salt Lake County. I mean, so it's, the supporters. So he's got the numbers there. The interesting thing is the likability of these two candidates. I mean, I think people like both candidates, so it's just going to be a fascinating race to watch.
Well, let's hit that point, because a poll that the Salt Lake Tribune did with the Hinckley Institute this last week puts Mia Love's favorability at 56%. It's pretty good. Not a lot of people have an unfavorable impression, and most of the people know her. So you're Mayor McAdams trying to launch a campaign with someone with 56% approval. Where do you start?
Well, this is funny because I asked him, I was like, so how are you going to go after Representative Love? She has done a really good job of treading this line between not totally supporting Trump, but also not still supporting very establishment Republican policies. Like, she's really tread that line because it's really difficult here in Utah, right, where Trump is not that popular. So, and she has a district that has a lot of Democratic voters in it, and the resistance is activated. And so he was quick to say, I like Mia Love, right? So the thing is she is going to have to make this not about like a personality contest. It's not going to be personal attacks on people, because that's what she did to Doug Owens before, is that he went too personal. So Mayor McAdams got to be really careful not to go there with her.
And I think really he's going to, you're absolutely right. It's not that you dislike either candidate, it's that you're just going to have to show why you think you can do it better. And in Utah, the politics is always different. People don't like negative campaigning. They don't like people going into the dirt. And so what voters here do like is people saying, here are my ideas, here's how I think I would like to do it, and they're both going to have to do that.
Okay, and he's going to have to overcome, I think, the challenge. If Mia Love, as you pointed out, her likability factor is high, he's going to have to convince voters, why should I change? I mean, that's going to be his biggest challenge. I mean, I voted for Mia Love. I think she's doing fine, so why should I vote for you now? I mean, that's going to be a huge challenge for Ben McAdams. And he touts, I've done all of this stuff. He mentioned in the interviews that we've done with him, he always mentions, I've worked with all the Republicans in the legislature, how we get along. That's going to be a message. I can work with other people, but he's got to convince voters to change. And if they aren't unhappy with Mia Love, that's a huge challenge for him.
The same poll, and this is your good point a moment ago too, Rod, 26% of the people in the state say they have not yet heard of Mayor Ben McAdams. That's a pretty good number as well. So how do we get that up, name ID up, while really focusing on this key message that he has to give, which if it really is about the platform?
That number surprises me, 26, because he isn't, he's the mayor of Salt Lake County. He gets a lot of media coverage. His name is mentioned by the media oftentimes. So I'm surprised the number is so high.
He's been on the Hinckley report.
Yeah, he's been on the Hinckley report. I mean, I would think that would come from the more rural districts, rural areas right now who may not know him, but his name recognition, I think, is pretty high.
I think his name recognition is good, and he has a whole year to get his ground game. And in an era of social media and news coverage and everything else where people are flooded with new politicians, if you get your ground game in early, that's how you can get your name out there where it sticks.
He has an orange school bus, too, that he used during his re-election campaign for his second term as mayor, and he said yesterday he's going to pull the orange bus.
The bus is coming back.
The bus is coming back, the orange bus.
I asked him a question yesterday. I said, what is your vision? And he says, he doesn't have a vision yet. He says, we're working on that now. And I think it's so important for successful candidates paint a vision. I don't think he's got the vision yet. I think it will develop, and it's going to be interesting to see what his vision versus Mia's vision for that office will be.
Okay, let me ask one more question about this race, and you touched on this a little bit. Mia Love talked about the negative campaigning she saw with Owens a little bit. Is this a campaign that you think is going to get negative, or is this one that they can both stay above the fray on?
I'm not sure. I think that'll depend on how much Trump plays a factor, right? Because we're going into midterm elections, so a lot of races are going to get attention, and a lot of it's going to be how closely aligned were you with President Trump, and how did the voters feel about that, right? So I think that's going to have a big determinant factor on negativity in this campaign.
I think the negativity won't come from either candidate. It will come from these outside groups.
Super PACs.
And super PACs will be trying to tie Mia Love to Trump, and we all know that no matter the president, they always have a tough time in their first midterm election. I think a lot of Democrats see Mia Love as a seat they may be able to turn, and so I think we're going to see a lot of negativity from outside the state, but not from Mayor McAdams in this race.
Because they both said they like each other. It's not that they don't like each other. So I agree with Glenn. I think the negativity is going to come from the outside groups. I think the candidates will try and stay above the board as best they can. The negativity is coming from outside money.
Yeah, probably so. And the negativity kind of relates to the polling numbers too, right? So we'll see how that goes. Let's jump to the 3rd congressional district, because this is very interesting as well. Mayor Curtis, John Curtis, at 46%, which is staying pretty high. Is this really a race?
I think people are a little bored.
They're bored with that?
I think they are. I think it's a smooth sailing for John Curtis. He had, a few bumps along the way with some, that Facebook ad I think you guys discussed a few weeks ago. And I just think it's exactly what it looks like. It's a safe race. He has the name recognition. He has the Republican establishment backing him with Mitt Romney, and he has the money now. Third quarter fundraising totals came in.
Right.
He's got a lot of cash to ride this one out.
And he already has the name recognition. He's the mayor of one of the largest cities in the state. He's had a lot of success in that city over the last 8 years, and he can basically just run on his record. And this is also a special election. While there are other races right now, you'd think that we'd be concentrating only on that, but with him having such big name recognition over some of his opponents, it's a little tough. As you said, it's getting boring because a lot of people aren't paying attention. They probably already know who they're going to vote for. And you don't have all these other races that would also make you concentrate on that one.
It's over. I mean, it was over.
You're calling it now?
Yeah, I think it was over before it started. Here's why. This district is, of the 4 districts we have in the state, the most conservative district out there. It is difficult for a Democrat to win in this area unless they change things. It's very difficult. Democrats will get their 20 or 30% probably. Maybe that may be a little high, but it's so tough in a very conservative district. And like Glenn was saying, he has a lot of. John Curtis has easy name recognition. He's mayor of Provo, largest city in the district, so it's over.
I mean, the Democrat Kathy Allen had a good backstory, right? She's a doctor, and the healthcare issue was so hot this year. But then Republicans didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They didn't repeal and replace Obamacare. They didn't get the Graham Cassidy bill through. So people's healthcare, although there's a lot of uncertainty out there, nothing really happened. And that was going to be the issue that she was really staking her campaign on, is that people were going to be scared about healthcare. They weren't going to trust Republicans to handle it. But now we don't know what's going to happen.
And it would be interesting to see if Jason Chaffetz were still in the race.
Exactly.
If her fundraising, I mean, the fundraising started off gangbusters, and then it cooled off. As soon as he dropped off, the fundraising cooled off. It would have been interesting to see if he would have stayed, if that would have changed any.
And that was her whole platform, was she was there to run against Jason Chaffetz, the change, and she thought that she probably had another year to run. She had to all of a sudden run early against a very popular moderate candidate in Curtis, and so that probably threw her off a little bit. All of her money came to run against Jason Chaffetz, and all that went out the window.
Yeah, we definitely saw the donations kind of stop flowing as soon as Jason Chaffetz left. So those are some good observations. But you mentioned this is a special election, and even though this is turning out to maybe a little bit boring,
Sorry,
it's all right. We'll still watch this, because there is something interesting coming of this right now, and it's the legislature against the governor, with the attorney general stuck right in the middle of this. All right, such an interesting story, because it becomes a separation of powers issue. Let's talk about that for a second, Julia. Start with you. What is this opinion letter that we're all fighting about now anyway, and why do we care?
Okay, so I have to break it into its elements. You know, the governor organizes the special election, which hasn't happened in like 70 years, he says. The legislature says we want to have a say in that. We want to say how we are going to conduct this election. So then they go to Attorney General Sean Reyes and say, hey, what do you think of the governor doing this all by himself? He writes a secret opinion. Then before he can give it to the legislature, the governor says, no, he's my attorney. This is attorney-client privilege. You know, we're not going to do this. And now the legislature on, I think it was Wednesday, says we're going to sue to get that opinion. And also the State Records Committee, it should be noted, last week said, Governor, you need to turn over that opinion. So we don't know what's in the opinion. The governor says he doesn't know what's in the opinion, but he doesn't want it released. It's very confusing.
Well, that's what's tough, is that the AG is the lawyer for everyone. He's the lawyer for the legislature, he's the lawyer for the governor, but it's also one of those things where, you know, attorney-client privilege, can the governor have a secret talk with his lawyer, but then again, he's also the lawyer for the legislature, so he's put in a tough position. I think this isn't about changing the election, it's not about overturning anything, it's more about what do we do going forward eventually.
Well, so what is the point then?
One word, stupid. I just don't see it. I mean, what is, I understand, you know, the Constitution is clear as to what happens, but it's really kind of vague at the same time. You know, what does this all mean? So I think you may see some legislative action. Try and clarify that. The lawmakers wanted input as to how this was going to be done. Okay, but the Constitution says it's the governor's call. So I don't see the dispute over all of this. I mean, what they hope to gain.
Speaker of the House Greg Hughes says this is not about me and it's not about my ego. But I mean,
okay.
I don't know. I mean, that's what he says. So it's one of those things where we are. It was like a classic power struggle.
Yeah. Separation of powers.
Yeah.
So there is a big separation of powers question here too. But just play it out for a second, because this is interesting. Let's just say this Attorney General opinion says Governor Herbert does not have the right to put forth an election the way that he did. I mean, what happens then?
So do we start over? I mean, what do we do if it says that? You're going to rerun the race?
I think that was the fear, was that if it was released and it was somehow negative to or contrary to what the lieutenant governor and governor had done, that it would open up a pathway for challenges by candidates. You know, we had that in the beginning about who can run, who cannot. So if there's some question about the legitimacy of like whoever wins the election, then other candidates come out of the woodworks, and then it's just a huge mess. And then the people of the 3rd District are left without a representative even longer than they already have been. So I think that was the concern.
Yeah, and you're right. It's about legitimacy. No one ever wants a race to say that it was illegitimate or that the other Republicans who ran in the race thought that it was done wrong. So I think what's honestly going to happen is this opinion will eventually be released. The election will be over. And no matter what the opinion says, the legislature and the governor and everyone's probably going to have to come together to figure out, if this happens again, how do we have the strict rules in place so that there's not this, you know, vagueness.
Yeah. And I think that's the question, the vagueness of this, and who had the authority, and, you know, the legislature wanted a say in this, they didn't get a say in it. Something's going to happen along that line.
Okay, we'll watch this one closely.
Yeah,
and certainly during the session, we're going to see how this thing gets resolved. Let's talk about some interesting numbers at the polls for Utah. Donald Trump's approval has risen to 52%. 52% in the state of Utah, which makes us the 12th highest in the country. What's happening in Utah? Everyone's going to shrug on that one.
No, I think they like tax reform. Tax reform is the next big thing. He's talking about the things that conservatives really care about, that Utahns care about, health care. He's talking about that. And he's trying to tackle these issues. So I think that he still has somewhat of a high approval rating in some of those states because they see him talking about it and at least trying to tackle these issues, whether or not he gets them done.
Mark Penn, who was Bill Clinton pollster for 8 years when he was in the White House, and he now works for Harvard, does polling for Harvard, wrote a wonderful article about a week ago, and he says, here's why the polls are wrong. And he said, what the polls don't look at are the substance of what Trump is trying to do. They look at how he's doing it, and people, he says this, he calls NFL players SOBs, how dare he? But the substance of it, he's saying it's not right to take a knee during the national anthem. Same on immigration. We've got to get immigration. So you have to look past how he does it and look at what he's doing. And he says that's where I think the polls are wrong, because there are people in this country, especially those who voted for him, well, they may be offended by some of his antics that he goes through. What he's trying to do, they want to see the same things done. And that's why I think slowly, if he gets tax reform, the numbers on the economy right now are amazing. If that continues, I think his popularity will slowly rise.
Well, I think there is some danger there that these polls seem to be pretty volatile depending on what's going on. We've had a couple natural disasters. People are questioning how his response to Puerto Rico has been. So all of that's still playing out. And I'm not to say like those numbers aren't legitimate, but it seems to change every week, right? Depends on what the scandal du jour is. And I would say he's gotten through past some rough patches. So we lost Tom Price, rest in peace, maybe a couple weeks ago. But since then, we haven't heard too much from the cabinet. John Kelly, as new chief of staff, has stabilized things somewhat. And I just think that makes the difference for some voters. It's like, okay, I haven't heard much lately on the Mueller probe, or I haven't heard about Russia in a couple weeks. So maybe things are calming down a little bit.
And the polls are fascinating, but people always say the one poll that counts is on election day.
Exactly.
All the other polls, it gives us things to talk about, but what happens on election day?
All politics is local, right? What's going on here? The economy's good. People have jobs. If your life is going okay, you're probably going to say, hey, the president's doing a good job because I'm doing okay, no matter who's in office.
But what do you have to say about what Rod was articulating there too? That maybe the substance of it is what matters. I'm willing to say, hey, I'm not sure I love what's happening, but he said he's going to work on tax reform and doing something.
Yeah, well, I was at a town hall meeting last night with Representative Stewart, and he even said that on issues like North Korea, he sometimes says to the president, he's worried about what he says. He thinks that some of the things he says don't help, but that he's glad that he's taking on the issue. That's what he was saying to the crowd last night, was even though I may not always agree with how he goes about it, he's getting it done.
Yeah, and I get callers into my radio shows say exactly the same thing. Well, women amaze me. When the Access Hollywood thing came out during the campaign, we didn't like it, but you know what? We still believe in him. And that's the Trump voters. Unless I don't know what it will take for him to alienate them, but right now they're still sticking with the guy because they look at Washington and they just see nothing being done. And at least I think the view is he's in there, he's trying to do something, and darn that Senate, they aren't letting him get anything done, and they're mad at him.
Maybe he just looks good compared to what Congress is doing right now.
He's smart. He's looking at the polls. He's saying, okay, maybe in Utah I'm 52%, but I bet the Senate right now is at 13%. So who's more popular right now? He knows how to read it.
Do you think he's successfully done what you kind of hinted at there? He put himself against Congress. So when we're polling right here is low Congress approval, and he's on the other side, and maybe he's not part of it.
I mean, he went after Bob Corker a couple weeks ago. I mean, he's going after members of his own party. I know, we were going to talk about this GOP civil war. He's not taking sides with his own party, and so that continues to be part of his brand as the outsider, as the person who is going to drain the swamp or whatever it is he campaigned on.
Explore that for a moment. The civil war is what you're calling it a little bit. Do we have a civil war occurring right now in the Republican Party?
Absolutely.
You say yes?
I mean,
absolutely.
Okay, give us the sides.
After the Senate it was Alabama, where Steve Bannon, his former advisor, backed this sort of insurgent fringe Republican. Was it Roy Moore? And he ended up winning the Senate primary over Luther Strange. So that's a classic example of what we're going to see going into, I think, next year's election, where Trump is even being pitted against his former advisors, as we're seeing these more like fringe elements of the Republican Party start to try to gain legitimacy and try to gain power.
But I think this war's been going on for a little while. It's just taken a new chapter. I mean, you saw after Bannon's comments on the Hannity show, where he said, "I'm going after everybody," and he even mentioned Orrin Hatch, and everyone went, "Wow, that's kind of strange." And then you had the established senators right now in the GOP all have come out and said, "Come on, Bannon, bring it on, because we're ready to fight you." So it's going to be interesting. There's the Bannon wing, or the Bannon part of the Republican Party, who wants to get rid of these guys. And I think his ultimate goal is Mitch McConnell. It's difficult to remove party leadership, more difficult in the Senate than it is in the House. And if he can get senators who will support what Bannon's trying to do, they can maybe get rid of McConnell. That's why the Friends are stepping up for McConnell, saying, "No, we aren't going. We're going to fight for McConnell."
Well, and
so
you said it.
There's a real. That's where the split in the party is right now.
And you said
Trump's kind of interesting. He's in an interesting spot.
Well, let's talk about his spot for a sec, because on Bannon, he came out and said, "I kind of understand where he's coming from."
But he also, in a way, didn't he say, kind of back off? And he did that today by sending out, he called 3 of the senators whose Bannon has targeted. He called them personally and said, "I'm with you on this." So what's Trump trying to do here? I'm not sure the game he's playing yet.
Well, and does Trump win either way? When you look at that Alabama race, Trump supported one candidate, but then Bannon was on the other side saying a vote for this candidate is a vote for Trump. So either way, they got a Republican in. And I think, to your point that you mentioned a little bit, this fight has been going on for a while. We saw this in 2010 when the Tea Party rose up and they started taking out establishment Republicans. They started, the word primaried came out because these Republicans were getting knocked off left and right with people who thought they just weren't doing a good job, or that they were a part of the problem in Washington. And I think we're seeing a little bit more of that, but I also think that this time around you're seeing more of the establishment Republicans start to push back because they don't like all of the message they're seeing this time.
Well, that is interesting. So would you say this is kind of reminiscent of the Tea Party movement? And if so, is there enough strength in this? I don't know if Bannon's the leader of it or it's a group of people like him. Is there enough strength there to kind of actually change the makeup like the Tea Party did?
I don't know. I honestly, I feel like we talked a little bit, the alt-right is part of this. There are these fringe groups that legitimize really odious points of view. And I think that's way different than the Tea Party, which was about big government versus small government. This is not about big government versus small government anymore. These are about, I have these very specific views about things and I want them legitimized. And I'm not sure that's, it's a little more sinister in my opinion.
I think Bannon's bark is bigger than his bite. I mean, he knows how to throw up a lot of gorilla dust, but in the end, what are the results? And he hasn't delivered yet, and it's going to be interesting to see if he can still deliver in some of these major races. Now, a lot of people are going to point to Jeff Flake. But Jeff Flake in Arizona has kind of shot himself in the foot with Republicans down there. It's really his own fault, not anything that Steve Bannon has done so far.
Yeah, it's like, to what end? It's like if you blow up NAFTA, and then what do you have in place of that? If it's all about nationalism or white nationalism or whatever it is that these people are trying to legitimize, like to what end will that actually serve the benefits of the United States, right?
Well, let's hit for a second on this great point about who's on what side, because we have seen, I think, Rod, you were saying the mainstream Republicans, and some of them have been around for a long time. You have John McCain giving a speech that Mitt Romney called Lincoln-esque this past week about it. Why are they positioning themselves the way they are? Are they the guard that's going to hold the kind of the center of the Republican Party, and why do you think they're coming out now the way they are?
Well, I think one of the things, and you mentioned it, that in 2010 when the Tea Party came out, it was about lower taxes, small government, is the government too big? But now it's these issues when you see the alt-right campaigning or getting out on some of the issues that really are a little bit more social, not so much economical and stuff. And I think that some senators are looking at that and saying, I don't want any part of that. I don't want those votes. And that's why that's why you see John McCain coming out and saying, absolutely, not only do I not support that, but it's wrong. But it's easy, in 2010 when someone says, yeah, I want smaller government, I want lower taxes. A lot of Republicans are in favor of that anyways. But I think seeing how this movement is gone, when you see some of the alt-right protests and other things like that, they want to distance themselves from that at this point. And it is about, history will remember what side you took.
Yeah, and the old guard in the Senate, they've got a tough message to sell to the American people. Well, keep us here because we'll get things done. Really? What have you done for us lately? I think that's the frustration people are feeling, is they're saying, wait a minute, you want us to keep you there, but you aren't doing the things that we want to get done. What is going on here? And if we have to get new people in there to get things done, we're ready to take the chance.
Well, and I think that's kind of been the message for almost a decade now. Yeah. That's why we saw the Tea Party come in, is because people were tired of things not getting done. I think that's, you see that on the Democratic side too. That's why you see a lot of people supporting Bernie or Bernie-backed candidates, because there's a split in the Democratic Party. Yeah. People are tired of things not getting done in Washington, and if they need to put someone new in, they're going to give them a shot. I think we saw that with Trump.
Same thing's going on in the Democratic Party. I mean, the term liberal used to be enough. It's not anymore in the Democratic Party. You better be a progressive, or you may not survive in the Democratic Party. It is really interesting, the extremes in both parties.
So we're seeing that come out for sure, and I guess we'll see what happens in the election places across the country. But when you started talking about people like Orrin Hatch, and he would kind of represent that guard as well, what do you make of the fact, if maybe that's what you were saying before, 75% of Utahns are saying that particular part of the old guard we're ready to move on from?
Well, I mean, I think that speaks for itself, right? We said, how often do you have a poll where 70% of people agree with something? But he said he would have a decision by December. So he might look at that poll and say, you know what, maybe it's time that I hang up the towel.
I go back and forth on this. He's got to be looking at the numbers. And the numbers are, rarely do you find a poll which 70% of people agree on anything. But then I look, Feinstein in California says, I'm coming back. So maybe he's going, well, if she's coming back, maybe I should come back.
Okay.
The dynamics are just fascinating.
Well, in all honesty, if he was on the ticket, would he still win? Likely.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to have to leave it at that. Very insightful. Thank you very much. That's it for tonight's show. The conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. We'll see you next week. Thank you and good night.